Okay, there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Excellent.
And you can share your screen if you want.
Okay.
And you can kick people out if you want. Right. Hank,
Oh, so you know what? Why don't I? Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No,
Hank. You're muted, Hank. Hank, you're muted.
Yeah, there we go. That's a sentence that didn't used to exist. It's a common sentence now, and I'm guilty of it as well.
Right.
Nice
Hi,
to meet
Hank.
you.
How are you? Very nice to meet you. I'm familiar with your work, so your reputation precedes you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Excellent.
You've presented here before, haven't you, in Auckland?
No, actually, no, I'm not. No.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
But I saw that you've been at the University of New South Wales. Faculty.
Yes, I was, where I actually had 4 Kiwi colleagues. And I'm in touch with 2 of them very actively, the other 2 kind of once a year kind of thing. So
John is working with a Kiwi there, which is Jonathan Reeves.
The UNSW has changed a lot since I left.
Yeah, it is.
It's a big department.
And then there have been so many mergers. I wasn't in the AGSM, the Australian Graduate School of Management, which now is just a building. And then they merge into the Australian School of Business, and it's impossible to keep track of what they're doing.
Yeah. Who were the Kiwis that you were working with, Rajiv?
Kiran Maher, he's at ANU. I'm presenting at ANU next week, and Kiran's going to be participating in it. I'm thrilled about it. He and his wife and my wife and I, we were all newly married at that time. All, junior faculty, thinking that we were going to absolutely conquer the world. You know how it is with young tenure track faculty. So, Kiran and Karen, the names are also very similar. We used to socialize quite a lot, and we are on regular touch via Facebook as well, and via email. Kevin Fox, who was actually quite active in the New Zealand econometrics scene. Kevin's still at the University of New South Wales. So he and his wife, Masami, they used to actually make it to Boston at least once a year. Kevin, Masami, Cam, and I, we were inseparable. I mean, we would have those stories of, hot Christmas Day, people piling on the drinks, and then,
Sydney is a wonderful place to live, and
yes.
Close to Bondi Beach.
Right. Coogee Beach in particular. Right.
Yeah, no. I've been quite a bit at the University of Sydney, and always enjoy my stay there. It's bound to be it.
Yes, it really is. And for us at UNSW, the closest beach for us was actually Coogee.
Okay.
Now, Coogee is nowhere near as urbanized as Bondi. And I'm from a tropical culture. I don't like the idea of burning in the sun. I've got enough tan, So we would go to the beaches in the winter. That was most pleasant.
The Bondi to Coogee is actually closed at the moment because of a shark attack. Attack yesterday.
Right. And in the Randwick City Council, we the last few years in Sydney, we lived on Botany Bay, and it is in that area that the shark attack happened. The first time in 30 years. I mean, it's although Botany Bay, where we were in Brighton Les Sands, people didn't really go into the water that much. As opposed to Coogee or Bondi. So it's scary.
But it does happen. It happened here in New Zealand last year. There was a fatal shark attack, and and about 5 years ago or so, and it's very rare, but in the human mind it works like, it's dramatic. So even though there's a low probability, it lives big in people's mind. My wife, for instance, is very reluctant to go swimming, and I can have any statistical argument I want to. I won't convince her.
Right. It's that old black swan, Nassim Taleb kind of argument, right? I mean,
that's right. Yeah.
Probability might be tiny, but the downside is so severe. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So we've been following the Christchurch test.
I've been here many years now, but that still hasn't really, tickled my fancy, so to speak.
Okay.
No. I'm sure you're talking about cricket, are you?
Yes. Rugby. I'll watch rugby to watch the haka at the beginning, but that's about my familiarity with rugby. But as an Indian, cricket is religion for us.
I don't even know if there's a cricket fan here. Maybe Norman. Norman might be the. I don't even know whether Norman is a cricket fan, but I'd be surprised if there's many cricket fans in the audience. John, you're definitely not a cricket fan, are you?
No, I'm into American baseball. I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah, my daughter was Boston born. She's a hardcore fan of the Boston Red Sox. Oh yeah.
All right. Yeah. I'm a Dodger fan, so.
Ooh, at least you're not. At least not a Yankees fan, right?
It can be worse.
Right, it can be worse. Yeah. Yeah, New Zealand has done, particularly after South Africa had just beaten India in their home test series. Norman is a cricketer. Okay.
I knew it.
All right. Yeah. So, Norman, just to make sure we're on the same page, my fascination with cricket is purely as a spectator. I could not get picked in a team if my life depended on it.
I used to play, but haven't played for a long time. So, but I do follow it, and with World Cups and everything, and the IPL.
Okay. So then you follow it more than me, because IPL to me is a strange beast. I don't get it. I don't understand T20. I see the IPL auction, just feels very American to me. I have no idea what that all is. I'm, probably really stuck in the mud. I betray my age when I say that. But to me, a good test match is where the action is. It's like, South Africa all bundled out for less than 100, and New Zealand just losing, 3 or 4 wickets? Already 21 runs ahead, and it's only the first day. So it's going to be a fabulous test.
A sport that takes 5 days and stops when it rains, etc., always makes a strange impression on me, to be honest.
It was a pretty green wicket. It looked like a pretty green wicket yesterday. So.
Okay.
So that's why I think a lot of people are getting out. So.
Right. And that's the Kiwi cricketer who took 3 wickets in 1 over. I mean, it's amazing how this tiny country can produce so many world-class cricketers, and is the world test champion. I mean, it really is fascinating. When in the last summer, our northern summer, when India and New Zealand were playing in the final of the World Test Championship, India, by far the largest, by far the richest cricketing nation, it loses to New Zealand. And it was, I was like, wow, well done, New Zealand. I really wish the outcome had been different, but you got to admire it. So,
David and Goliath.
Yes. Although, if it keeps happening, you cannot use the David v. Goliath.
No, exactly. Yeah.
I've been waiting for Tava so that she promised that she would introduce Rajiv. I guess it's a time, so it will be a short introduction, I guess, my part. Professor Rajiv Bhattacharya,
very good,
about the pronunciation, has been at the University of Maryland, Washington University in St. Louis, and UNSW, And in addition to economics and finance, Rajiv is an expert in big data and recently published a book titled Option and Market Efficiency of the Big Data Approach. And Rajiv's work has been published in top journals all over the world. Over to you, Rajiv.
Oh, thank you very much, Bill. That was very nice of you. Thanks, John. And so it really is a wonderful pleasure to be with you all. John and I had exchanged emails earlier, and Tava and I, we are going to catch up right at the end. Tava and I, we go back like 12, 13 years. We were colleagues at WashU together. So we'll catch up at the end, so not to worry. As we were exchanging emails, and one thing I wanted guidance from John and Tava as to kind of how you would like me to focus on, because as I was mentioning earlier, it really isn't worth your very valuable time or my much less valuable time if all we are going to get is polite applause at the end. I really would be very grateful if you could give me your comments as critical as possible, because as you know, the reviewers are not going to go kindly at it. So I'd really rather you if you even tell me, look, just abandon this. This is not going anywhere. I'd rather know now rather than anything. So I'd really appreciate as many comments, and I would like you to guide me as to which parts of. I have a 50-slide deck with a bunch of things in the backup and things that. Let me just get started, and please, if there are things that you want me to focus on more that is of more interest to you, or you think potential referees would be, and if you would be so kind as to kind of keep this the lens in your mind as to what would be potentially a good home. If there is a future for this paper, would be a good journal that could be potentially a home for it. So without further ado, I will. So can you see my screen? Not yet. All right. How about if I make it a full screen? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what are the research questions we are trying to, and this here, it's to me, when I start asking this question, this is a very broad question, and something that can be applied to many, many different things. Whether if you're going to a doctor, you need to know, what is the doctor's diligence? Is the doctor relying only on what you are saying, or is the doctor doing additional tests or applying their expertise in order to do that? And so then also in addition to being diligent, you also are talking about, in this context of asymmetric information, the objectivity. Is the doctor reporting her best estimate of your diagnosis to you? So diligence and objectivity are quite different concepts, but are both very important in the context of asymmetric information. And of course, the two of them together then define moral hazard. Lack of objectivity and lack of diligence define moral hazard. So if we do have moral hazard, now this is very general. Now we can say, but what do we have data for? And this is why I love working in finance, to be very honest, because the data are so clean. If you were to work with an IO problem, you'll have to clean the data. I mean, it's just, so we have a huge, well, not really huge, but just a relatively big data set of financial variables, management guidance, earnings announcements, and analyst forecasts. So it captures this asymmetric information, and we have this data. So, and in addition, if we are able to make because we have the earnings reported at the end of each quarter, and if we make the additional assumption, so for the first three, for diligence, objectivity, and moral hazard, we don't need to make the following assumption. The following assumption is that the earnings that are reported at the end of a quarter are in fact the correct earnings. If we do make that additional assumption, then we can tease out, in addition, adverse selection and report quality in this particular empirical framework. So Obviously, the incentives are there because as rational players, we are all trained in incentive compatibility and game theory. You know, they're all supposedly rational players, and maybe they're quasi-rational. We don't get deeply into the incentive structures or what are causing them, whether to play around with the incentive structures. That's not the focus of this paper. Somebody wants to take this approach and apply it to that. That would be an absolutely wonderful complementarity to this body of work. And then having said that, all right, we are empiricists. You know, we like to stay grounded. If all we're doing is, you know, as I often say, having grown up in a socialist system, it's only a Marxist who thinks that just being a theorist is good enough. You know, at the end of the day, you know, the theory has to be tested with actual data. So then let's ask ourselves whether these variables, probability of diligence, probability of objectivity, probability of moral hazard, index of adverse selection, index of report quality, are these variables impacted by the important capital market events of the recent decades? So that's the overall structure. We are going to, those are the questions we are going to try to attempt to answer. And as I mentioned earlier, please interrupt me at any point of time, because I personally forget what your question, what if I try to answer later. Now, in the way the data are set up, we use analyst firm as one combination. We cannot separate them out. And the other restriction, and I'll be upfront with you because that's a question that invariably comes up, is IBIS hides the identities of the analysts and the analyst firms. So we have no way of matching them. We only have the codes, so which are not particularly useful. So we don't get to do so. Some, you know, for instance, development economists will invariably ask the question: is gender a good indication of good quality or good diligence? We have no way of testing that. I've kind of already preempted this part. So we apply it to an analyst's forecasts when management is providing guidance as well. Diligence would require the analyst, once again, it's the analyst firm, acquiring and analyzing non-public information, even potentially information that is not available to the studied firm itself. So my co-author user, Mahendra, who's a former dean, who was Tava's and my former dean at Olin. So he uses the example that a good analyst, if she is analyzing Walmart, should go to Target's parking lot to see what kind of parking traffic there is. So that's an example he kind of forces us to keep in mind. So that's diligence. And so we then set up a diligence model and a non-diligence model, rather than use the Hausman specification test to actually compute the probability of diligence under agnostic priors. Is Paul Geertsma on the call? Okay. If not, I'll touch base with him outside, because he has worked as a sell-side analyst, and I would love for his input into what those probabilities would mean, especially in the context of, because we are having agnostic priors. Okay, objectivity is much easier to understand. The analyst, now, if the analyst it does its due diligence or not, and forms her best estimate, not best as in highest estimate, just best estimate of what the firm's true earnings. The true earnings are never observed, not to the econometrician, not to the public. And so but the analyst forms its or her best estimate, and objectivity would require the analyst reporting that best estimate as her forecast. And that's how we'll test. We'll use, again, under agnostic priors, the probability of objectivity given the data. So the empirical probability, the posterior probability using Bayesian updating of the probability of objectivity. And once we have the probability of diligence and probability of objectivity. Moral hazard follows directly. We also have an independence condition, which so gives you the probability of moral hazard is just 1 minus the product of the probabilities of diligence and objectivity. Okay, now up to here, as I said, we don't need any notion of the firm's earnings report at the end of the quarter reflecting true earnings. Up to this, beyond that, we do need that. And so once we have that, then we can we have a notion of accuracy. How accurate was a particular analyst forecast? And then now that we have moral hazard, and if you take that ex post normalized accuracy and you regress it on moral hazard, controlling for all relevant conditions, what is left? Adverse selection. So that's how we do not have the probability of adverse selection. We have an index of adverse selection. And then the report quality, we also have an index of report quality, which is determined by analyst competence and diligence. Okay, so
Rajiv,
yes.
Just a quick question. So diligence. So it sounds like you will classify 1 or 0 in terms of diligence, right? And
no, I won't.
Okay,
I can, if you don't mind, I'll use the p-value. It turns out to be the 1 minus p-value of the Hausman specification test.
Okay, all right.
So we actually get a posterior probability of diligence.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Once again, it's the posterior probability under agnostic priors. I mean, the point is, John, we can do it, why agnostic priors? If you want to do a different prior, you will get different conditional probabilities, but then you'll have to justify your priors, right? So anything in this paper, we're reporting our results under agnostic priors, but you can look at the proofs at the end. You can the point is it depends on the priors, as you would expect with Bayesian updating. It depends on the priors, so if there is a good reason, and that's what I was hoping Paul would be able to give me some guidance on, if there is a good reason to have a different set of priors. In the absence of any good reason to have a different set of priors, we say, well, agnostic. We don't have any evidence, so we'll just say equal probability of diligence versus non-diligence as the prior, and let's see what the data tell us is the ex post probability. Okay. Yes.
Can I ask, so it's quite a few difficult terminology here, and moral hazard, diligence, objectivity, etc. And I suppose that's all mathematically defined in your model. If I would ask you, so how are those outcomes going to help me as a practitioner? So would your model actually allow me to, for each analyst, get an estimate about their competence and diligence? So is this an analyst specific score that we're going to get out of this? Is that
yes.
Is that the purpose of the whole exercise?
Yes, exactly, Hank.
Is that,
yes.
So is that competence and diligence, is that fixed for the analyst, or is it actually dependent on the firm that the analyst is analyzing? For instance, if it's
the fit.
Industry specific, right, it's the latter, is it?
Yeah, so it's IJ. So if I is the firm, J is the analyst, then all our variables are at the IJ level. So
right, and there's no T in it, so it's time varying change in those factors.
Right,
Okay,
Hank, that's the interesting thing, right? So when we are measuring them, we need a time series to actually estimate the IJ, but then when we are doing in terms of the experiment of whether these variables are impacted by important capital market events, so we actually have to separate our data set into 4 sub periods and estimate the IJs separately for those 4 different sub periods. And then we report the results of whether these major capital market events have had significant impact on these variables.
Okay, good, thanks.
Hank, in that case, should I just dive straight into the, because it seems you'd be more interested in the definitions of the variables.
You know, whatever you had in mind, please proceed.
You know, I'll tell you, this the literature part. It's really all right, let's do it. Let's do it very quickly, and I'm very curious to think, see, Hank, what you think about the actual model. So you know, asymmetric information. It goes back to Friedman and Savage. I mean, it's a long history, and my old friend Simon Grant, who is at ANU, he has written a lot of stuff on this. So I'm going to be presenting to him at ANU next week as well. So this is a you know, it's a huge and very, very rich body of literature that is our a contribution, and because we're using analyst reports and financial variables, and there is again a very rich and interesting body of literature in accounting and finance on these things. So we would like to make sure that we have our paper firmly anchored in all of this. So the second bullet point, competence and diligence determine report quality. It turns out I have actually worked with a number of these authors, and they have done some amazing work and extremely sophisticated. So it would be very good to hear how all of this fits in with all this. So we have used competence, diligence, report quality, exactly the definitions that is standard in the literature. We are not coming up with new definitions of these concepts. What we are coming up is ways of measuring them in the context of asymmetric information and econometrics. The accuracy of analyst forecast, this is a relatively kind of superficial a bit. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound crude, but you know, if your thing is sometimes like some of these papers are simply about whether accuracy of an analyst forecast depends on whether the variables determining firms' earnings are more macro in nature. I mean, that's interesting. I'm not denying that's interesting, but it at the end is not the kind of econometrically sophisticated or based firmly in asymmetric information as our objective is. The next two bullet points is obviously that's a large part of our focus on this paper is, regulations matter, or do they? So they have this U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and FINRA. FINRA is the successor entity to the old NASD. And so the answer is they have all kinds of attempts have been made over and over again. You know how it is with governments, right? You know, they're always fighting the previous war. So, you know, shut the door, the horses have already bolted, but so let's see if they do have any impact. So that's kind of, that's very much our objective, is to see what all these regulatory changes. In fact, for instance, Dodd-Frank doesn't have any direct impact on analyst forecasts. We are saying, well, that was clearly a change in regime. So does this change in financial regime have any impact on these variables? So the incentive of analysts or analyst firms, particularly as a Rochester PhD, when I was there, that was really such an exciting body of work that was going on. Ray Ball was my co-author, somebody I genuinely admire, somebody I love discussing cricket with. So they have done all kinds of very interesting, but this is not our focus, as I mentioned earlier. But if somebody wants to run with this and say, you know what, I'm going to figure out how we can structure to go back to your question, we can come up with these scores, right? Now, if you were to tell me, now, Rajiv, how can we then structure the incentives for analysts or analyst firms so that the probability of diligence is higher, the probability of objectivity higher, so that the competence, the fit is better? Wow, wouldn't that be a fabulous piece of work to do? So, so that would be, but we don't do that here. And also relationship of analyst forecasts, recommendations, and management guidance. We do use that, but that's not our real objective. Our objective is we use that management guidance because we need something that is relatively unbiased estimate of earnings in order to make our econometrics work. So that's part of it. We are not really spending a whole lot of time into, my wife used to work as an analyst, and in the bad old days where firms would actually give out their guidance a couple of days ahead of time to their favorite analysts, but that has been cracked down in recent years. So which brings us to is the old boys network really very important? And there's been some very interesting work that has been done on whether foreign sounding names of analysts make them get less access to these old boys networks. Where did they go to school? And some of the interesting things are not where they went to college, but where they went to boarding school turns out to be more important in this. But that's a literature that's there. Our literature is is not really part of this contribution. Our paper is really not part of this literature, but we will continue. Okay. So what are the conditions that we impose? So we restrict ourselves, and we'll see very soon, to positive actual earnings, management guidance, and analyst forecasts, and we don't allow any substantive revisions. And we need this in order for our multiplicative model, because without a multiplicative model, these numbers are not comparable across firms or across time or across forecasts. So that's why we restrict ourselves to positive, these variables being positive. We do not make any a priori assumptions about the richness of the information sets available to the analyst firm or compared to the richness of the studied firm. Going back to what I was saying earlier, this is for instance, my co-author, Mahendra, is the one who insisted on that we needed to make, we should not be making any such a priori assumptions. And going back to his example, if you're a good analyst of Walmart, then you should be looking at the parking lot of Target to see the kind of demand. And that's not information that might be available to Walmart. So a good analyst should go, information can potentially be richer than the studied firm itself. The third bullet point is basic competence. I mean, look, if you as the analyst, if your information set at least does not include what's available to the public, maybe you should be doing something else. So that's the basic competence. The fourth one is something that I think behavioral economists might give us some trouble on, but is that we assume no memory loss. That is, as time goes by, your information set gets richer and richer. And finally, is that the empiricists, my information is exactly the same as the public information. In the actual paper, if that's something if you are interested in the probability theory of all that, which I, for instance, am, and I know Simon Grant will be, we actually spend a lot of time on the distinction between the sigma algebra of the public versus the sigma algebra of the market. But once again, if you're interested, I'd be happy to talk about it, or it's there in the appendix of the paper. Okay, we'll use star. It means it's unobservable to the public and hence unobservable to the empiricist. So left arrow means learning, right arrow means announcing. Hebrew letter means actual variable. Roman letters means by the studied firm. Greek letters by the analyst. So this here is our timeline. So the LFIT star is the true earnings of the firm in quarter T. It's always unknown. So the next row is the studied firm. GIT star, it's the firm, it's its own best estimate of its true earnings. Doesn't have to be exactly, it doesn't have to be the same. We're but we never know, as the econometrician or the public never knows what that GIT left arrow star is. But the next variable GIT with the two arrows, that's the guidance that the firm provides about its own earnings at the beginning of quarter T. All right. So you can see that GIT, everybody knows that it's no, because it goes to the public. The guidance is available to the studied firm provides it. The analyst firm obviously sees that, and the public and the empiricist also observes it. Based on all of this, the analyst forms its own best estimate. See, this is a left arrow, its own learning and analysis. It forms its own or her own best estimate of firm I's earnings in quarter T. That star represents that it is not public information. Only the analyst knows it. The studied firm doesn't know it. And then after all of this, the analyst J puts together a forecast FIJT, which is analyst J. Now, when I say analyst, I mean analyst firm J provides its forecast about studied firm I's earnings in quarter T. All of this is over in quarter T plus 1. This YIT double arrow, that's the firm's announcements of its earnings. That's the firm saying what. Now, remember, for probability of diligence, probability of objectivity, of probability of moral hazard, this is it. Don't need any further assumptions. For accuracy and adverse selection and quality, we need to make an additional assumption that this YIT double arrow that is disclosed at the beginning of quarter T plus 1 is in fact equal to LFIT star, the actual earnings of the firm in IT. We have to make that assumption in order for the accuracy and adverse selection and all of that. All right, so so remember GIT left arrow, that's the firm's learning process. So the log of its actual earnings plus this overguidance factor plus error. This is how we are setting it up, that the firm, there might be a systemic underreporting or under correcting. We're not ruling it out. That log of AI is simply allowing for the possibility that there is, it systemically underreports, underestimates, or overestimates. It could be 0. We have no problem with that. Oh, sorry, AI could be 1. We have absolutely no problem with it. So this is a multiplicative model. So this is the learning of firm I about its own earnings. But what does it report? GIT double arrow is a function of GIT left arrow star, that is its best estimate, plus a systemic, this AI right arrow is a systemic over reporting or under reporting, which could be 1. It could not, it could vanish. We are allowing for a systemic and this noise EI star right arrow, which we never observe. Now remember, this log of GI, the 2 arrows we do observe, that's as the management guidance. The rest of it we don't observe. Okay, so So then the first lemma that we have is the systemic overguidance parameter. We need an estimate of it, and we get this provides us this geometric mean of the guidances that it has divided by earnings as they were reported the next period. You take the geometric mean across all previous paths. That gives you a consistent estimate of this overguidance parameter. As I said, in an ideal world, it should be 1. There should really be no systemic, but we're allowing for the possibility. Okay, this is probably the most important slide of this deck, is the difference between the, and John, what we are pointing out, this is what these are the 2 different models. The diligence model is the first, and then the non-diligence model. And we are going to select between these models. So what is the diligence model? It's the learning process. The diligence is about the learning. It's not about the announcement. Diligence is about the analyst firm learning about firm I's earnings. So alpha I, it's a parameter. These things, so I'm going to, the second one here is beta ij left arrow log of actual earnings plus various, these are pi it are financial market variables. Delta ijt is the amount of difference between guidance time and forecast time, and the residual. And under non-diligence, exactly the same. Only difference is under diligence, the learning has the actual earnings as part of its diligence function. It's beta ij left tilde log of aleph it star, whereas under non-diligence, it just has the public estimate of it. And what's the public estimate? As we said earlier, previous guidances divided by overguidance parameter. What the public looks at the guidance and says, I see your guidance. I know you have a habit of exaggerating. I'm going to adjust your guidance by that exaggeration. That's the public variable. So this aleph it star hat is publicly available information. That's, as we said, basic competence is your information is just as good as at least as good as public. So under non-diligence, you're just using public information. Whereas under diligence, you are in the learning, you are using actual earnings. That's the fundamental difference. Now, what does that imply to in terms of is this? I'm going to actually skip this because under then non-diligence, this is, you know, the expectation of this residual term is 0. The covariance of this public information aleph it star with the residual function is 0. This is publicly available information. But under non-diligence, this covariance term is no longer 0. That is the fundamental difference between the 2 models. Under diligence, this remember this aleph it star is actual earnings. The hat on it means it's the public best estimate of it, which is guidance adjusted by exaggerated factors. That's the non-diligence model. Under diligence, this whole thing, then because these errors, it's the residual term is the noise that is brought in by the analyst, and also this EIT star is the noise that the firm itself provides in its guidance. Because now in the previous slide, this delta IJ star is white noise, whereas here it's a combination of the analyst forecasts noise and the firm's its own noise. So this combination, this residual term, the covariance of that with the adjusted guidance is non-zero.
So, sorry, Rajiv, I might be missing something, but aren't you just saying that a more diligent or competent analyst has lower forecast errors? So the more diligent analyst ends up having lower forecast errors because the prediction is closer to the actual outcome.
We will relate it to that later. It doesn't follow from this. You could be diligent and be a horrible analyst. You could be, you could be a very, doctor who's working very hard looking at all of this stuff, but you could be incredibly incompetent. And
right,
you could,
okay, I see what you're saying. You could still have big forecast errors, but at least you're trying. So
right.
you dare to deviate from the public.
Yes.
Information set, right.
Right. And that's why we related to it later. We are able to tie it in if because what you said is, once we say, okay, having said all of this, going back to what we're selling, David versus Goliath, if New Zealand keeps beating India, you'd have to say, come on, it's not David, that maybe India is is the David then. So that's the kind of thing that the accuracy at the end, if you do have information about accuracy, and that can only happen if the firm is actually revealing its true earnings next period, then we are able to tie it. But the diligence and objectivity don't necessarily have anything to do with accuracy, except in the fact that, of course, that they get all related together with the accuracy as it's reported later. So therefore, these two models differ only in that covariance being 0 and non-zero. And this brings us to, so therefore, under non-diligence, OLS and two-stage least squares are both consistent, but ordinary least squares is asymptotically efficient. However, under the diligence model, ordinary least squares is no longer consistent, but two-stage least squares is. That's so therefore, the Hausman specification test becomes applicable, where if you have beta naught hat and beta 1 hat are both consistent, where under H naught, whereas under H1, beta hat naught hat is no longer consistent, then this M function follows chi-square under H naught. So we are therefore able to use the Hausman specification test, and here we do need agnostic priors, then which is to say, before any data, if without any evidence, if we were saying that it's an equal probability that an analyst is doing diligence versus not doing diligence, then the empirical probability of diligence by analyst firm J about studied firm I is equal to 1 minus the p-value of the Hausman specification test. And the proof is there in the appendix of the paper. Now, once again, let me emphasize, there's nothing, well, there's nothing mathematically unique about agnostic priors. It's just the only one, unless there is a good reason we don't want to make assumptions about priors. But if there is a good reason, and that's what I was, if you have a chance to ask Paul if there is a good reason to make the priors should be different, then that's a good reason to change them. So the result is that the empirical probability, the ex post probability conditional on the data, as we would expect, depend on the priors. And under agnostic priors, the probability takes on this very nice form. And then under objectivity versus non-objectivity, and this part here, for the diligence, all you really need is that the analyst, the outsider in this asymmetric information is using non-public information. You don't need all kinds of things about guidance and so on. But in order to measure objectivity, you need to have something that can provide a certain approximation to the actual earnings. So for instance, I am diabetic. I have this glucometer, and I can always test myself. It's 173, not good. Clearly, I'm stressed about the glucometer. So there is something that I can talk about if I am the diabetes specialist, endocrinologist who's looking at me, that's one number that they have in front that they can look at. So in order for us to kind of get our sense around objectivity, that's why in this particular case, we need that management guidance. And it turns out it is the difference between the objectivity model and the non-objectivity model, as you would expect, is the analyst adding some noise to its best forecast. Remember, objectivity would mean that if I'm the analyst firm, and if I'm being objective, then I'm going to report exactly what my best estimate is. And non-objectivity is the part that is the noise that you're adding. And we're modeling that as this alpha I had. Remember, these are right arrows because this is in the announcement, plus as a function of the pi ITs, which are the capital market variables, and a function of the delta IJT, which is the time difference between the guidance and the analyst forecast. So this here, now, this doesn't quite follow from the residuals of, it's much more complicated than that, because the covariances of the pi ITs and the delta IJTs to this combined noise, they're both non-zeros. So so we cannot use an F test, we have to use a Wald test under two-stage least squares. And so our result, therefore, is, once again, under agnostic priors, where the probability of objectivity is the same as the probability of non-objectivity, unconditional. The empirical probability, once we have the data of objectivity, is the p-value of the Wald test in this condition. Once again, if you were to say that you know, this we really should be giving more prior weight to that probability of objectivity should be 80%. If that is the case, our results can change accordingly. It's a pretty straightforward function of the prior probabilities. But once again, in terms of, and if you, for instance, you know, you think, look, you need to make that clear in the paper, how it depends on the priors, that's something we can definitely do, especially in the appendix, for instance. But because we have not found a good enough reason to impose specific priors, we have left it at this.
All right. Rajiv, what about the tendency of analysts to give forecasts that are too high? I mean, structurally too high. That you know, in terms of your prior that they're objective, they're clearly on average not objective, right? Their estimates tend to be too high, and I think there's this walking down. This walking down. There's a paper by Richard Sloan. It's walking down something. And I think initially they give estimates that tend to be too high because they want to make the firm look good. Close to the earnings announcement, it tends to be too low because then the earnings can be better than the analysts were predicting. So the firm looks good. So at different points in time, different analysts, depending on their relationship with the firm, will have different objectives to be definitely not very objective.
Yes, that's an excellent point. And we. In order for us to be able to estimate them, in our each sub period, we are holding that to stay the same for that sub period. For each IJ combination, remember, all our estimates, all our measures are at that IJ level. But you know, but they are across you know, relatively small sub period. And the other thing, Hank, that we're doing is we're ruling out substantive revisions. But look, I mean,
you model, right?
Yeah. But Hank, you know, this is a very important point. You know, it's not a crime to be an idiot. It's not a crime to not do diligence, but it is a crime to lie. So objectivity is a much more important thing than diligence is. So and so we will, you know, if we look at, but in order for us to actually understand what these data and what all of these mean, we'll have to kind of separate these out. And remember, objectivity means, are you actually, non-objectivity means, are you actually lying? You have your best estimate, but are you actually reporting something else? I go to the endocrinologist, she looks at it and says, 173. Oh no, you're not diabetic, go eat as much sugar as you want. That's lying, right? But in the diligence in the part of it is she actually taking the non-public information? So we are separating those two things, and then we are relating it all together in order to measure the diligence, objectivity, moral hazard, and so on. So I'm going to then, in the interest,
Rajiv, yeah, just a quick question. So when you estimate that phi left arrow, so conceptually, that's what the analyst knows, but as an empiricist, you don't know what they know. So you have to somehow estimate it, right?
Well, we actually never. That's never identifiable.
That's right, but for this exercise, you have to estimate it with, sorry, not identify, but it goes, so it's kind of modeled, at least with public information, no?
Yes. So this is the the non-objective component of the forecast. That's how we define it. But let me go back to, because we are making these assumptions that the guidance, the firm knows on the basis of these informations. So what are the different residual terms we have? The EIT star left and right. So in the next thing, we have the epsilon IJT star left, and then in the announcement, right. Okay, so we have 4 residual terms, requiring them all to be independent. And then this is how our regression equation ties up. So the 2 alpha IJT left star right star is the first intercept term. The beta IJT is only a left, because that only plays a role in the learning by the analyst firm. These two things, the log of, this is the log of GIT is the management guidance, and the log of AIT is the exaggeration parameters, like, okay, you systemically exaggerate, so we're allowing that. Both these parameters come into when you're talking about as a coefficient of the public variable. Both these parameters, you see where my mouse is, right, John?
Yep.
So the gamma IJs are a function of the difference. They both enter in here. They're not separately identifiable. All we are doing is, when we take, this is our regression equation, because honestly, we don't really care about them being estimable more than we care about whether the residual term turns out to be correlated with this gamma, Aleph IT star hat or not. That determines our the probability of diligence. So in particular, you see these alpha IJ left and right. We don't care to separately identify them. And then because of the way it follows out, once you get from the diligence, you get your predicted. What is the firms? You are able to, you do the 2-stage least squares estimate, and then you're able to get the predicted of the analyst, which is, remember, the predicted of the analyst is all a function of the left stars, then left arrows, then there is no right arrow in there. But once you subtract that predicted, the best estimate, the spread is the best estimate by the analyst. This here, phi IJT minus this, that is the lack of objectivity. This here becomes a function of the right arrows. But if you look at the residual terms, you have these, all those 4 residual terms are coming into the regressor equation, which is why the covariance of this, now this log of epsilon IJT star double arrow, log of EIT star double arrow, they're both combinations of the left arrows and right arrow terms. And so this here is the log of EIJT star, 2 arrows, that's the left arrow plus the right arrow. Similarly, EIJT star double arrow is the left arrow plus the right arrow. So there are 4 error terms in there, but that's fine because of that, it is positively correlated with the capital market variables pi it, and also positively correlated, not positive, it's just correlated with the delta IJT term, which is not a problem for us. All that says is that we cannot use the F test. We have to use 2-stage least squares because there are these covariance endogeneities that are going on.
Yeah, okay, so I'm sort of trying to understand what's going on there in a sort of miniature way. So what I noticed was that the actual value of earnings is used in determining diligence only, right? Because objectivity doesn't use the actual value of earnings.
So far, actual earnings doesn't enter into our calculations until we get to. So far, actual earnings are not observed. Right. Oh, sorry, my bad. Yes, the difference between the diligence model and the non-diligence model. As an econometrician, I don't get to observe the actual earnings. Thank you. That's very good question. But under diligence, the analyst actually observes the actual earnings, whereas
the true value.
Yeah, the true value. Whereas under so this is why under diligence, this thing comes out. All these all these things come into place. Whereas under non-diligence, it's a very straightforward function because it's just taking the best estimate, the public estimate of the earnings and using it into it. It's like, is there a non-public information? I don't care. I'm not being diligent. Whereas under diligence, you are, the starting point of diligence is, remember that equation, that the forecast is a function of actual earnings. So this thing turns out once you input the firm's learning and all that, and that's why we need to have the earnings of the firm's guidance in order for our empirics to work, is we are able to have this function in terms of observables. So this equation is in terms of observables. Yes.
Yeah. So an analyst can be subjective and diligent at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. In fact, that's, I think, Hank's most important point there. There's so much evidence that they might be, doing a very well packaged job, doing all the diligence, and then doing things in order to please management. In fact, we have a whole section on this. Remember, I did a lot of time in litigation, so I'm very curious about those things as to whether they are doing those things. I mean, you all remember Enron just a few months before bankruptcy. They were shouting at analyst forecasts. Unless you give us a great forecast, you're not getting our investment banking business, right? So there is those kinds of things in there, which is why our focus on the major events turns out to be an interesting question for us to know the answers to.
Yeah, I asked because non-objectivity to me sort of means not so good intentions on the part of analysts.
Oh yeah.
Whereas in your model, analysts can consciously deviate from public information to get more accurate estimate, and that's the best analysts, and they are at the same time non-objective and diligent, right?
The best is, but there is, so that now the best case from a public policy perspective is to be diligent and objective. You do your diligence, get non-public information, form your best estimate, that's diligence, and then you report exactly that as your forecast. That's like when I go to my endocrinologist for my diabetes, she looks at non-public information and then gives me the straight news. That's a good doctor. That's a good analyst. So, and in terms of moral hazard, that's what you're trying to moral hazard is where you have high diligence and high objectivity. The lack of that. So lack of diligence and lack of objectivity is moral hazard.
I guess that's my question then. Okay, so how do you distinguish between what they actually know and what you guess they actually know?
Yeah, that's precisely what this why this comes out of this. So if you look at this equation, this is the regression equation that comes out once we model, and that's one thing. Remember this is particularly why couldn't we do this in the case of a doctor's diagnoses of doctors, because we don't have this results. We don't have some kind of the management guidance that we're having. We have that additional information, and we are imposing conditions on that in order for us to get this regression equation, which is a function of all observable variables, only because of the information conditions we have imposed on this. Even though this alpha ij plus alpha ij hat, this coefficient is a combination of two that we cannot identify separately. But that's fine. But because of the conditions we have imposed, very reasonable conditions on management guidance, that this falls out the original diligence model, which is, in this case, you cannot directly estimate it because you don't know what this LF IT star is. But because you have imposed those conditions, and why we can use it in this particular information structure of analyst forecast, management guidance, and earnings reports, is because this equation, this regression equation, turns out to be a function of observables. So the diligence is, it's the diligence is the selection between the probability of diligence is the selection between the diligence and the non-diligence model, and that is given by that Hausman specification test. Now, once we get that, the objectivity is, now remember, once you have estimated, from the previous regression equation, you're able to come up with the estimate of what the firm's actual best estimate was from the two-stage least squares. That deviation from that gives you the objectivity. And in keeping with the way we have defined diligence, we are also going to say, okay, the objectivity is, the probability of objectivity is the under agnostic priors, the probability that you're choosing objectivity. Now, Hank, you could say, why aren't you measuring it by how much additional noise you're imposing? The problem is it positive? Is it negative? And is it then, because if we are able to put it in the probabilistic terms, we are able to get a probability of moral hazard as well. Which is right here. The probability of a moral hazard is simply the lack of diligence and lack of objectivity. So the probability of moral hazard is 1 minus that. And because we impose these independence conditions, they turn out to have this pretty nice. And so far, we are not, yeah.
Oh, Rajiv, so I was thinking about, those are important concepts, and you split your sample up in different periods. And so if I'm speculating about the results that you're going to show, then I would think that objectivity has gone up after the Dodd-Frank Act, right? Because that was one of the purposes, if I'm right. And the diligence might have gone down because wasn't there a change in the rule to the extent that analysts could get paid by offering free research, get paid back in work that the other side of the business would get in terms of corporate finance. So my prediction would be, I'm just thinking about your concepts and the way you do empirical tests, that objectivity has gone up and diligence has gone down. But so that's what I would expect. But so I'm curious whether you're going to end up with those outcomes.
Yeah. I mean, it's more nuanced than that, but that is the general idea. So this is the, yeah. So the point is they do go up, kind of move in different ways. Now, in terms of, remember, the dot-com bubble is, who knows what was happening, right? Enron, WorldCom bankruptcies, it was just a, then Sarbanes-Oxley, which was really a way of knocking their heads together, forcing CEOs to be honest about their, so once again, it was a regime change. What was the biggest thing in that? So in the second row, the global analyst research settlements that the SEC got all these people to agree together, which is exactly what you had mentioned. So if you look at that, yeah, the empirical probability of diligence improved. The probability of objectivity, no significant difference really. And a large part of it is simply this lack of enforcement. So the third arrow is because the global financial crisis was followed immediately by Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank, as you know, it was really the left, the ultra left, just taking over the American financial system and the CF, Credit Financial Protection Bureau, and all those things. They just imposed a lot of created what we would used to joke. This is full employment for financial economists in the U.S. So a lot of people got jobs. So the point is, there were two very, very different global financial crisis. It's just one of those worst we have seen in our lifetimes, right? And followed by Dodd-Frank. They were just 2008, 2009, 2010. So what happened after that? Diligence went down. Objectivity, moderately up, not really significant. Adverse selection, index of adverse selection actually went up a bit. Now, this is the part that, because I've been talking to the FINRA people, let's do an interesting experiment here to say, let's combine the impact of the global financial crisis, Dodd-Frank, and FINRA 2241. Now, remember, FINRA 2241 is the only measure here, except for, well, the global analyst research settlements and FINRA 2241 were the only regulations that were specifically aimed at analyst behavior. So, well, let's see if they actually had a distinction. So if you go back to the previous slide, the incremental fixed effect of FINRA, the diligence significantly increased, objectivity at least increased, and the others, well, they are what they are. Accuracy it went down. We're not quite sure what to make of this. Index of adverse selection went down by not much. The quality of forecast increased quite a lot. So you would say, well done, FINRA. You had substantial increase in diligence, substantial increase in quality. Well done. So we're like, okay, let's take this a bit further. Let's combine the impact of the global financial crisis, Dodd-Frank, and FINRA 2241. Look at that row. Nothing is significant. So all FINRA achieved was to move back variables to pre-GFC levels. If you were FINRA, you would not be happy at these results. But, as a very good old friend of mine who was recently retired from the Boston Consulting Group, FINRA is what they call an SRO, a self-regulatory organization. So Philip is a very philosophically inclined. He was like, Rajiv, of course, why are you surprised? That's what Kant had said a long time ago. There is no such thing as self-regulation. So while things that government bodies, statutory bodies, when they imposed, those had significant impact. But self-regulatory bodies, they really did not have an impact. So
yeah, I'm actually surprised in the way that you explain this, because the way I would expect you to explain it, if all this was bundled in time and somehow you've got those three things all together, GFC, Dodd-Frank, and FINRA rule, the aggregate effect is neutral. But then if we single out FINRA rule, then apparently the effect is positive in terms of diligence of the analysts, for instance. So I'm surprised that you say this. It sounds like something bad happened after the GFC and Dodd-Frank, and the FINRA rule actually helped to reduce that negative impact and brought it back to neutral, what it was before.
Okay.
It seems like if you combine them all, we're back to where we were, and the positive contribution really came from FINRA, because if you single that out, apparently it's a positive.
Okay, that's a very fair interpretation. Yeah. So in the paper, I think my exact words are that FINRA, significantly positive impact on diligence and quality, albeit just enough to ameliorate the significant deteriorations that happened just after the global financial crisis and Dodd-Frank. And you're saying, well, why, that's no reason to say albeit. It's like, that was a good thing. Yeah, okay. I think I'll send a note to the chief economist of FINRA tomorrow. I think they'll be.
I might be one of those left-wing economists that finds employment in this.
Indeed. So I'm happy to go into the more important, into the data work, into or descriptions, or the instrumentation. Anything that you would like me to discuss in further detail?
Well, I think the value in what you're doing is indeed to judge the impact of events, and obviously rule changes are never exogenous shocks. These rule changes are implemented because something was wrong, and maybe even without a rule change something would have changed anyway. But that's an internal problem with these kind of experiments, that they're not really natural experiments. They're unnatural experiments. They're driven by something else that changed in the system. But it doesn't take away that analyses like this have a lot of value. And there's a lot of papers that look at the impact of Dodd-Frank and that look at the impact of Sarbanes-Oxley, etc., and do their research in a particular way. And I think analysts forecast errors and probably the bias, the optimistic bias, and that walking down whether that has to be reduced. So are typical perspectives that I've seen in that field. But you offer a different way of looking at it. The model, it's a complicated model, so complicated that we even use Hebrew letters. But
I am a game theorist by training, as we joke. And if you're a game theorist, you're either Jewish or you're Bengali. So.
Yeah, but I think what would be helpful for me is to see the differences and the similarities between that body of research, which has this practical importance in terms of telling us this rule or that rule didn't work, and this is this changed after GFC or not. How your approach relates to the other approach that have been taken to also do the same kind of evaluation. Was this a good rule? Was this just to keep the financial economists at work or not? So, and in the development of the model, I missed that link to concepts that I'm a bit more familiar with. So, obviously, I hadn't read the paper before, so I lost you at some stage, which is unavoidable. But to the extent that you can relate some of those concepts back to concepts that people are more familiar with, it would be useful. I heard the same thing in John's question, where we're kind of grasping for concepts that we can relate to. Anything that you can do there, I think would be helpful. And I can see the importance of actually separating these things out, diligence and objectivity, because they're different concepts, as you made clear. And it is interesting and also important to know what happened, because some of these rule changes were aimed at objectivity, others were aimed at diligence, I suppose. So as I said, I had this prediction based on my interpretation, and that would be good, I think, to try to relate that a bit more to what we're familiar with.
Indeed. Okay. That will be my top priority.
Is there a way to apply this at the individual level? That would be a lot more interesting. If I can suss out who's diligent and who's not, and who's objective and who's not, that would be a bomb.
Yeah.
Rather than applying it at an aggregate level.
Yeah, but my wife, who is much smarter than me and keeps me grounded, that's to her. She was like, write it as an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. This is a way of yours of, evaluating analysts. Absolutely. The problem, of course, is, now remember, in the IBIS data that we academics have access to, they take off the identifiers of the analyst and analyst firms. I've actually been negotiating with IBIS. They're like, yeah, but it's a ridiculous amount of money they want in order for.
Rajiv, I happen to have seen a paper on SSRN recently that works out and indicates how you can trick the system and still get individuals identified within IBIS. I wish I could give you the reference, but I've seen it because it's always been on my mind as well to be able to do it. And these guys have a way of getting around it, and they can, with the current IBIS data, identify individuals. And I fully agree with John that my guess for star analysts, they're highly diligent and they're pretty subjective. It's interesting to make that link, and if you can individualize it, that would be great.
Right, and we can. That's the thing. Given but we have the analyst code and we have the analyst firm code, and given a particular analyst code and an analyst firm code, I can tell you over any particular period of time how diligent they were, how objective they were, what was the level of adverse selection, what was the quality of their product. I actually can measure it for each of those particular set of data. So Hank, if you could find that reference on how you can tease out the actual identifiers. Oh my goodness. That would be absolutely awesome. Although I think we could get, but the IBIS, actually the last communication I had with IBIS was they're very reluctant to release the identifiers because they have been sued in the past. So in particular, the last thing was that, like, if you want the identifier for a particular analyst firm, we have to email them to get their permission. That was the last thing they emailed, at which point I said, first, you're going to charge me $100,000, and then you're going to, and this is a huge data set. So how many emails do I have to send? I thought,
right, exactly because of that legal exposure, I was amazed that this guy comes out with a working paper on SSRN telling us how to do something that the owner of the data doesn't really want you to do. Yeah.
Oh wow, that would be so wonderful if you could. I'd be very, very grateful if you could, if you could put your, try to remember the reference. And now that you mentioned it, I'll do a search myself. I'm supposed my daughter's birthday party is coming up this Saturday. I'm supposed to take her to pick her cake tonight, but she might have to wait on that one. Oh, that would be great. Any other questions or anything else you'd like me to? Actually, can I, this thing here, this summary statistics is something that you can see. Look at this, the mean of the empirical probability of diligence is 1.83%. And that's clearly, once again, a function of the agnostic priors. Does that make you question the agnostic priors rather than anything else?
Well, it clearly does make you question those priors, right? So what do you think? Right, so how are you looking at that number? How to interpret that number there?
That the probability that it is exactly what it says, the conditional probability of due diligence by an analyst firm about a studied firm, the probability is only just about 2% that they were doing,
right.
they were being diligent, and that's clearly a function of agnostic priors. Now that's what, for instance, Paul could tell us that, I think the prior should be that an analyst firm, the prior is 90% of diligence, then that number will increase quite substantially. But as an empiricist, I have no way of deviating from an agnostic prior without other evidence.
Well, these analysts have a job, they get paid. They're not paid to just replicate public information. So my prior would be 99%, and then there's 1% that gets away with not doing anything. So am I seeing this incorrectly?
No, you're seeing it exactly right. So maybe this is whether we kind of this slide, maybe this table, maybe there should be like 3 variants of this table. One under agnostic priors, one under, let's say, 90% prior probability of diligence, and even one with 99% probability of diligence, and let the reader draw the conclusions they may.
Does it impact your other tables though? So it becomes a difficult paper if everything you show in terms of empirical results actually becomes conditional on priors.
No, that's exactly the experiment results. The results of the impact of time, they are not affected. It's an increasing function. The probability is an increasing function of the unconditional probability of diligence. So the ex post posterior probability, the empirical probability of diligence, is an increasing function of the unconditional probability of diligence. So now how much it will increase, I actually don't know. I haven't done the calculations, but that's eminently doable. But it does not, the rest of the results are not affected because it's a linear function. Do you have any other questions?
Well, going back.
Sorry. How do you interpret the? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, John.
Yeah. How do you interpret the? Now that we are on probability, how do you interpret the probability of moral hazard? That's 98%.
That's that's really a function of the fact that the empirical probability of diligence is so low. So remember, the probability of moral hazard is 1 minus the probability of diligence times the probability of objectivity. So if the probability of diligence is so low, that's why the moral hazard probability is so high. So it goes back to Hank's point that maybe we should spend more time on seeing how these change with those are the only ones that will change with the priors. All the other variables, the ex post normalized accuracy, the index of adverse selection, and the index of analyst forecast, those don't change. Those are not probabilities. Those are indices. Those are just increasing functions. That's how I mean, so they're I mean, obviously they don't have the strong interpretability of a probability, but by the flip token, they're like, it doesn't, it's just an increasing function. It doesn't, it won't change with those things.
I thought, following up on John's suggestion, to look more at individual analysts, there's a lot of studies that look at, or attempt to look at the accuracy and maybe the diligence and objectivity of analysts' forecasts as a function of agency problems. So for instance, a firm is planning a seasoned equity offering or other corporate finance related work that is clearly, clearly more likely if the analyst has favorable results. So it could be interesting to look at those papers and also as a validation of your results to relate those firm-specific circumstances that would lead analysts to be less objective, for instance, to relate it to your measures there.
Right.
If you would pick that up, then that would be a strong validation of what you're trying to do.
Right. And that's, I completely agree with you. And that's what I mentioned earlier. And that's part of my intellectual excitement gets into the idea of those incentives that you mentioned, different particular structures. I just don't have the data in terms of, but if this is the kind of thing that if you or anybody has a way of, I think that's an excellent joint research opportunity to relate it to those agency theory incentive structures. Boy, would I not like that. I mean, I think we could. I mean, that's a presentation to the Senate Financial Services Committee in terms of how to structure incentives to actually get people to behave, because clearly what, just putting out rules and setting up research bodies and providing full employment to financial economists in the US, that's not fully doing the trick. I mean, there is more nuance to it. So yeah, for everybody on this call, if you do have, John, you have my email address, right? So if you don't mind circulating it, if anybody can please, if you have any ideas, I'd be so extremely grateful. And especially if you, the two things that I started out with, as strong criticisms as you can. In Rochester, they used to say, you have to be old enough and ugly enough to be in this profession. If you cannot handle criticism, go do something else. So yeah, to me, as my daughter is just turned 14, and I see how that has changed. How when she was 8, I had to sugarcoat with her, and now that she's 14, I don't. And I love this growing up. The idea of treating someone like a grown-up is to be honest, is to give them the unvarnished truth. However, not what they might want to hear. So I'd really appreciate any comments, especially criticisms. And the other thing that I started out with is, if you think this paper has a future, if you can suggest a journal that might be a good home for it.
It all depends on how you develop it further. But if you somehow simplify the theory, that would help enormously. In case you want to send it to a good accounting journal, for instance, where if you can make it firm specific and you can simplify the theory, then I think a good accounting journal would be possible. But on the other end, so another paper could be the more complicated theory version, and then some kind of macro, like what you do here, based event study testing the effectiveness of regulations. But I think definitely for analysts are a subject area in finance, but also in accounting.
Right.
things like objectivity. Yeah, you know.
Econometrics journal, like a journal of econometrics, perhaps?
Yeah. Or financial econometrics.
Okay.
Right. Which is a very good journal.
Right. Okay, so that yeah, so two different paths to consider. There would be two very different papers. I'm not saying we publish two papers. I mean, I think that would be, oh, maybe, but that's not. But it would have to be rewritten quite substantially in two different directions to meet the two different targets that you had mentioned. Okay. Thank you very much. John, is Tava on the call yet?
I'm here. I got to apologize for being late. I got the time wrong. I was supposed to introduce you. I had a lovely introduction all prepared too. I'll email it.
All right. How are you doing, Tava?
I'm good.
It's so very good to see you. I mean, I was at, Ryan Cooper, our common student, is now a tenure track faculty here at the University of Maryland, and we get together quite often. And we were having lunch last week, and I mentioned that I was going to hang out with you, and he was like, say hi to her. You're, this is the thing about. I mean, I'm sure all of you feel the same way about Tava. She was absolutely loved at Olin. So it's so good. I've been planning to get back in touch with you ever since you left, and I left soon after. Left Olin soon after. But so yeah, it's great to be back in touch. Yes.
Thank you, and thank you for an interesting seminar.
Oh, thank you. So Tava, you have a very different, hardcore information economics or kind of a stochastic processes kind of approach to it. Would you? What would your take be on?
Well, I mean, you could then go ahead and build yourself a model, right? But I mean, you have a model, but a more abstract model. But I'm not sure that would be necessarily the next step.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually, because in the next week I'm presenting to ANU, and Simon Grant will be in the audience. So I am putting together a much more, the sigma algebras and all that stuff to send to them. I'll send a copy to you as well, Tava. I mean, all you have to say is, Rajiv, all right, that's enough. Enough of this rubbish. I'll be like, okay. Although I'm sure you'll say it so much more kindly because that's who you are.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much.
Yes, indeed. So wonderful to catch up with you all. I really genuinely appreciate your comments, and I'd be very grateful if you all can let me know if you have any further comments. Tava, we had talked about maybe catching up for a few minutes. Are you still up for it? Or
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Rajiv.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Rajiv.
Thank you all very much. Take care. And
thank you, Rajiv. Bye-bye.
Thanks again. Oh, Jacopo, you're there. Jacopo is one of my former students at the University of Maryland. Hi, Jacopo.
Oh.
Yeah.
So good to have you.
Not contributing that much on your research, but this is not my field anymore. I do not work so much with numbers and models, and it's okay. It's a pleasure to listen to you and to your research.
Excellent. But if you have any ideas, just email me. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I hope so. I hope I have that.
All right. Thanks, Jacopo. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
You might want to stop the recording.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
so sorry. I don't usually get times wrong. I'm usually very good at living by my calendar, but yeah, I don't know. Somehow I got noon and